How's it going? Social Studies 10 students, this is Mr. Harris. This is a brief 14-minute or so lecture about MUN, nuclear weapons, and the blocks. I'll make one more video later this week. My students, I think you've already seen these slides, but if, this is a good review, or maybe you were absent one of the days. So let's start with what is MUN? Like, why are we even doing this? So MUN is an activity that actually precedes the UN itself, believe it or not. There was actually MUN type of simulations of various countries meeting even before the UN was formed in 1945. And one of the goals here is really for you to focus on skills. So these skills would include things like arguing a perspective you don't hold. And this is very well aligned with what you will be doing in DP classes, your junior, senior year, where, for example, in economics, a big part of what I teach is multiple perspectives in regards to the economy. On one hand, you have people who would say lower corporate tax, that's going to bring in business, it's going to help the economy grow. On the other hand, you have people say, well, we need to tax corporations more so we can pay for roads and schools and public goods. What's really going to be good as well here is the idea of collaboration, right? I think in the age of AI, things like just writing well is not enough, right? Everyone can write pretty well if they have a computer in front of them. But it's the part of compromising and working with others, especially if you're part of Bloc B and D. Those skills are going to be even more needed. Now, keep in mind that you have to represent your country. That's called on-country policy. If you're off-country policy, that's a problem. Like if you're North Korea and you want to collaborate with the USA, that's a problem. Participate, whether it's asking questions, helping your group create presentations in the moderated caucus. And keep in mind, this is kind of what makes MUN slightly different than debate, right? If you've actually ever seen a real competitive debate, I don't think we have those programs here in the Middle East, but you could YouTube it. It's really crazy. It's just basically, people trying to get in as many words and as many points in as they can. That's not quite the purpose here, right? The purpose is to kind of listen to each other, think of multiple perspectives and whatnot. And perhaps the most important point down here, have fun, right? We could have an essay. We could have you, fill out a multiple choice questions, but this is kind of meant to be a simulation that is, a little more fun way of learning. Now, let's talk a bit about nuclear weapons. So 9 countries have nuclear weapons. Russia and the US have the lion's share of most nuclear weapons in the world today. Now, the big question of this committee is who should have nuclear weapons. And it says I feel like how it's decided too. How it's decided and who decides this. An issue this important in regards to national security, no one is neutral, right? So you should be able to find somewhere on the interwebs your country's policy in regards to this question. Now, there's 2 major frameworks everyone should be aware of, regardless of what block you're in. The first is the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Essentially the first real treaty the world got together to sign in regards to nuclear weapons. And the idea is that nuclear weapons should not spread to new states, that states that do have nuclear weapons, like the US and back then the Soviets, it would be today the Russia, would slowly decrease their number of nuclear weapons. And finally, nuclear weapon armed countries can only use them for peaceful means. Now, and that they can use nuclear energy for power generation, medicine, etc. Interesting holdouts, those who never signed it, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea famously dropped out. This was about 23 years ago. So it wasn't Kim Jong-un, but his dad, I think it was Kim Il-sung. I might be wrong. Kim Il-sung was his grandpa. Anyways, yeah, Kim Jong-un, the predecessor, his father, to him. Now, Article 6 of the NPT is one of the most controversial lines of the whole treaty. I'll just read it verbatim. Each of the parties to the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament. A lot of kind of unnecessarily difficult jargon there. Essentially what it's saying is that everyone will get rid of their nuclear weapons. The problem is the date is early date, so what the heck does that mean? And this is what the critics of this part of the treaty say. They say, look, you guys said there'll be fewer weapons. It's been 50 plus years. You guys still have tons of weapons. But at the same time, those who have nuclear weapons, especially the US and Russia, would say, look, Well, we have fewer weapons than we did in the 1970s. So in fact, we have taken action. Now, the second one that everyone should know, this is going to be highly encouraged by Bloc C, is TPNW, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So this is the one that is stating a lot more stronger in regards to non-nuclear weapons, saying everyone get rid of nukes, don't test nukes, don't even threaten the use of nuclear weapons, right? So very different language than NPT saying, oh, you can have nuclear weapons if you already have it, you can use it peacefully. Here are saying, no, let's totally get rid of it. 70 countries have ratified it, so that's stronger than to sign it. That means they're saying they will follow through on it. But over 90 states have signed it, but you'll notice that's significantly fewer, right, than the NPT. It's a lot of countries in the global south, like Latin America and Africa. And in fact, 0 of the countries that have nuclear weapons, like China, US, Russia, have signed it. I thought there was a page on the criticism. It's okay. We'll just go to here. So yeah, what are the 2 treaties you should know? NPT and TPNW, right? Essentially the original, the OG treaty signed about 50 years ago, and then you have the more recent TPNW that some criticize is a bit too utopian. Others would say this was the necessary upgrade from the NPT. Now, let's talk a little more about nukes, and then we'll get to the blocks. So nobody's disarming, right? So the problem is, even though the actual number of nuclear warheads have gone down, for example, the US and for Russia, it says China there. I think this should be Russia. I think that's a typo, because we have China over here. They're all modernizing their weapons, right? They're upgrading, updating, and they're spending tons of money. In fact, the US has $1.7 trillion, that's with a T, dollars planned for nuclear modernization through 2046. This would be a major criticism the TPNW would have with the modern structure. Now, who might be next? This list could be much longer, but just 4 quick ones here. Iran, we've seen them in the news recently. North Korea has been continually testing their nuclear weapons for many, many decades now, especially since 2003, right, since they pulled out of the NPT. And then you have countries who are more or less kind of part of the establishment, but are kind of considering, right, developing their own, whether it's South Korea with over 70% of the people saying, hey, we use nuclear energy, maybe we should use nuclear weapons, or Japan, who, recently they've kind of had a slight pivot towards a more conservative right-wing government who's saying, look, Japan needs to protect themselves, right? They can't rely on other countries. This is kind of a multipolar view of the universe. Now, of the world, not the universe. We're not that scale, just the Earth scale. Now, let's go through the blocks. I really want to keep this lecture under, it might be closer to 15, so I'll do 2 minutes per block, and then we'll wrap it up. So let's start with Bloc A. Bloc A is the establishment, right? Essentially the Western establishment. These are the countries that are basically saying, let's keep it the way we are going. So you have countries like the US and UK and France that own nuclear weapons and like the NPT, and then you have countries like France, Canada, Australia, Germany, who have essentially always supported, right, these other countries. Their core argument is quite simple. Keep it the way it is, right? We haven't seen a nuclear weapon drop since 1945, and we haven't seen one used, at least on people, since this treaty in the 1970s. They're saying, TPNW is naive. There's no way we can totally disarm. And finally, that Article 6 is being honored, right? If you look at the number of nukes the US and the Russians have, they've significantly decreased since the 80s. Now, there is a lot of criticism, too, that Bloc A will face. Things like, well, maybe the US has fewer nuclear warheads, but they're spending tons of money on it still. Criticisms is, well, so when exactly are nuclear weapons going to be gone? You guys said eventually, right? I think it said to a recent date, right? It was like, what does that even mean? So there are definitely attack points on them too. Now, Counter West is an interesting one. This is one where there's going to have to be compromise within the group, because you'll notice these guys don't necessarily always work together, right? Although China and North Korea have kind of a close relationship, Russia and North Korea are not necessarily that close, and so forth. So what's going to be big here is Bloc B collaborating with other countries. So, sorry, I digress. Unlike Bloc A and C, where everyone is really together, this one you're going to have to come up with some compromises, right? Because you actually have some NPT states and non-NPT states. So that's going to be one of the goals here. The reason why these are together is they are rejecting Western-led international order, right? They're saying, look, countries should have, and this is a key word here, sovereignty, right? The countries should have the right to defend themselves. So they're going to argue that, look, for years, like, enforcement seems to be only on countries that America doesn't like, right? It's North Korea. Why isn't Israel getting the same scrutiny? Why is Iran being researched more than India? There seems to be double standards. They're saying Article 6 has not worked, and back to that word, right, sovereignty, they're saying countries have the right to protect themselves. Where they're vulnerable, this is going to kind of depend on what the group decides to go with. But, I mean, at some point, they're going to have to defend North Korea. They're going to have to defend Iran, right? That's a challenge in itself. There's also going to be the issue of defending countries like Russia using nuclear threats, right? So they're going to really have to kind of make their argument steelman. So steelman is in advance. Be ready for the type of criticisms they're going to receive. Now let's move on to two more blocks, Bloc C, D, then we'll call it a day. So Bloc C is South Africa, Mexico, Brazil, Nigeria, and Kenya. What do they all have in common? They're all in the southern hemisphere. Well, Mexico, not quite, but they're all more or less part of the proverbial south. And they have never had nuclear weapons. They never want nuclear weapons, right? They're all fans of the TPNW. They essentially argue that, look, nuclear weapons are the beginning of the end. We don't want World War III. They're saying, look, we have proved in Latin America and Africa that no nukes works, and that the NPT does not work. Now, criticism towards Bloc C is going to be that, well, TPNW is naive, right? We can't really expect every single country to disarm. What if one country doesn't disarm? They're going to end up controlling the whole world. And they're saying that this is a system that just is, utopian and unrealistic. So this team, though, their advantage is they're all quite united. And finally, Bloc D. In some ways, I think this is the hardest one. The eclectic mix of India, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, Argentina, and Japan, right? Quite a heterogeneous combination here. You have NPT countries, non-NPT countries. You've got Asia, Africa, South America. And the advantage and disadvantage is your mix. And let me explain. What I mean by that is at no point should Bloc C be like, well, maybe each country can have 2 nuclear weapons. Just no, right? Like there's a clear cohesion and direction in regards to their policy. But also it means it's easier for them to kind of go in one direction. Whereas for Bloc D, because it's such a diverse mix, the advantage is you guys can take it in pretty much any direction you want. I'm not going to be like, oh, it's off country policy, because honestly, you kind of have to, right? To some degree, there will be certain things your country might not agree with completely, but you're going to have to agree as Bloc D. But I would say that's also the challenge, right, is figuring out what is the points of compromise you can make. Now, here are possible arguments for and against. I'm actually not going to go into detail here because, again, this eclectic mix could pretty much go in a variety of directions. I also know not every class has all 6 of these countries, right? If you just had like India, Japan, Turkey, Egypt, it might look a little different than if you had Pakistan or Argentina, Or if you had the same group of countries here but didn't have India or Pakistan, that's also going to look different as well. And I think that's it. Yeah, so that's really all I have for today. I'm going to record one more video, which is going to focus on opening speeches and making rezos, and that's pretty much it. So again, if you have not seen the other video, please watch it. The other one's more important. It's only 5-6 minutes, but it explains in detail, right? What's the rubric? What's being evaluated? What does day 1 and day 2 and day 3 of next week look like? So that's all from me. Have a nice day. Goodbye, Social Studies 10 students.